distinguished jurist, a very distinguished lawyer, former union minister, a very eminent parliamentarian, somebody who has contributed to the public discourse for many years, many decades amidst our company. We've been keen to bring him to our campus for a while, and I'm delighted that he's here. I invite Dr. Ashwani Kumar to kindly come to the dais. Professor Shiv Vishwanathan. Shiv, can I request you to please bring Dr. Ashwani Kumar to the dais? At the outset, I want to thank all the students for being present here to hear Dr. Ashwani Kumar. While I know for sure that you are keen to hear, I also couldn't help but recognize the fact that giving you attendance does help to bring you into these forums. Thank you very much for your presence, and I know that you are doing this amidst your preparation for the examinations, which is beginning in a few days. So, notwithstanding the fact that we are giving you attendance, you have chosen to be here, shows you are keen to be engaged in these issues, so I'm grateful to you for that. Let me take a moment to introduce Dr. Ashwani Kumar. Dr. Ashwani Kumar, as I mentioned, is a very distinguished jurist and a lawyer, somebody who has made significant contributions as a parliamentarian. He has also authored several books. He has a graduate degree in honors from history from the St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, obtained his bachelor's in law LLB from the Faculty of Law, Delhi University, which is also my alma mater. Dr. Kumar wrote his MPhil dissertation on the legal control of international terrorism while pursuing his MPhil in international law at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Kumar was awarded the doctorate in law by the Punjab University, Chandigarh in 2005. He was the youngest designated senior counsel of the Supreme Court of India at the age of 34. I know that age because that was the age I was appointed as Vice Chancellor. So I know that it is not common for people to be appointed as a senior counsel at that age. And his contribution since then in the field of law and justice has been truly remarkable. He also served as the youngest additional Solicitor General of India. He has appeared as a senior counsel in leading cases before various courts and also in several arbitration cases. He was a keynote speaker at an international conference on global tax conflict organized by an organization in France. He also represented India at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2007 and 2012. He made a presentation as a panel event organized by the Harvard Law School on the Constitution and the Executive in 2012, and another panel in which he spoke at the Harvard Club in New York on the legal architecture for consolidating the economic reforms process in India. He has been an author, a distinguished member of several important parliamentary committees, and also served as a minister in the Union Cabinet under the UPA regime. Most recently, I will say that we are also privileged to welcome him on account of another extraordinary event, or rather distinction that he has been bestowed upon most recently. I am delighted to inform you that the government of Japan has announced the foreign recipients of the 2017 Spring Imperial Decorations. Dr. Ashwani Kumar, former Union Minister for Law and Justice, has been selected from India for decoration with the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun, which is the highest category of decoration among the orders of the Rising Sun. The decoration is conferred in recognition of distinguished accomplishments of individuals. Mr. Ratan Tata was one of the other Indian recipients of the decorations in the past. I also want to, in ending, I will say that there are very few individuals in contemporary politics who has had a deep sense of engagement with legal community in an academic context. Dr. Kumar has been a thinking individual. He has made significant contributions in institution building. He's deeply committed to the cause of higher education and legal education, and we are very fortunate to have him at our campus. Now, before we formally begin today's event, the format of the event will be as follows. I will now invite Dr. Ashwani Kumar to introduce his book. The title of the book, as you already are aware, is Hope in a Challenged Democracy, an Indian Narrative. He will probably speak for, say, 15 minutes or a little more. And then we will begin a conversation in which both Professor Shiv Vishwanathan and myself will raise some questions and issues which he may respond. And after which we will throw it open for discussion. I will invite all of you, both faculty members and students, to do the same. Without further ado, I call upon Dr. Ashwani Kumar to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj, for those generous words of introduction. At the outset, may I express my deep sense of gratitude to the Jindal Global University, to Dr. Raj Kumar, to the faculty, and to all of you here who have afforded me this opportunity to interact with you on my book and to share my thoughts with you. I'm particularly delighted that we have Mr. Shiv Vishwanathan in our midst today, whose writings have inspired me, and I have referred to him in my book as well. Mr. Gurmunder, who has set an extraordinary example of staying back in our country after his distinguished ambassadorship of his country, Iceland, to teach at this premier educational institution. I think we must be doing something right as a country to have such outstanding people in our midst. But let me first tell you why I wrote this book. I wrote this book for two principal reasons. The first was to dispel the misconception that almost all parliamentarians do nothing worthwhile except shouting in parliament. This book contains some of my interventions in Rajya Sabha on subjects that continue to be of utmost relevance to the future of our democracy, to the future of our country. It also contains a record of my published articles on subjects relating to the Constitution, on subjects that concern the dignity of individuals, the dignitarian ethos of our Constitution, the sacrosanctity of the right to privacy and reputation, and so forth and so on. I've also mentioned about the disequilibrium in the functional space of our Constitution, and therefore these are issues that I believe will appeal to you as law students, most of whom are studying law here. But more importantly, issues that go to the root of the future of our democracy are also addressed in this book. So you might well ask me, if I were to summarize the essence of this book, what is this book all about? So I would summarize it the way I have summarized it in my book, and with your permission, I would wish to read just 4 or 5 lines from that. In its entirety, the book is a reflection on the politics and the future of our constitutional democracy. It is about contested ideas and competing equities, ideological preferences and proclaimed biases, the legacy of liberalism and impulses of parliamentary majorities, the suborning of principles to political expediency, and a gradual erosion of the constitutional order from within. It is about the decline of deliberative democracy, leadership, and the ascendancy of ceaseless competitive politics. And I make a somewhat daring statement. And I state that despite its proclaimed resilience, ours is a weakened democracy, denuded of its deliberative apparatus, devoid of its liberal conscience, and robbed of its moral appeal. Why do I say what I say? I've been in the Rajya Sabha for 14 years. I have been an insider for several years. I have been the beneficiary of a system for several years. And I have been at the receiving end of the system for several years as well. All in all, when I put my mind together and I ask myself the question, what is it that I must share with you this morning about our democracy? The only thought that comes to my mind is to bring home to you the challenges that our democracy faces. Because unless we openly and candidly admit that all is not well with our democracy, that there are challenges that need to be faced and addressed, we will not be able to protect it or to nurture it or to strengthen it. So the starting point must be to clearly identify as to what has gone wrong with the system of governance in which we take pride. Now let me address myself to some of these. We have the whole issue of trial by media. Several years ago, the Supreme Court in its judgment in the Mirajkar case said, trial by media offends against the basic principles of fair trial, and fair trial is an integral component of the rule of law. And rule of law is a part of the basic structure of the Constitution, and therefore necessarily trials by media that infract reputations and offend the dignity of people without bringing home culpability offend the basic structure of the Constitution. But we see day in and day out repeated trials by media under the gaze of the Supreme Court. Is it not an aberration? Should the Supreme Court not be taking suo motu cognizance of it? Should the Supreme Court not be coming down to enforce its own judgment? But that is not happening. The idea is not to find fault. The idea is to show the mirror to people who must be compelled by the force of public opinion to recognize that all is not well with what we set out to achieve for ourselves as a country. Take, for instance, the complete absence of accountability in governance. Accountability in governance does not mean people having to suffer reckless allegations and the state becoming the persecutor rather than the prosecutor. See the blurring lines, the fading distinctions between persecution and prosecution. You must prosecute wrongdoers according to processes known to law. But where does prosecution begin and persecution end? Or where does persecution begin and prosecution ends? Is the question that we must ask ourselves. Never before in the history of this country, never before, and I say so with great confidence, were there as many prosecutions launched against political leaders of different parties across the country as they are today. If you go through the record of prosecutions culminating in convictions, you will find the percentage so dismal, so minimal, so non-existent that you can ask yourself the question, was it right in the first place to set in process the prosecutorial powers of the state against citizens of the state? Howsoever powerful a person may be, howsoever resourceful a person may be, as a lawyer I can tell you, it is an impossibility to face state-led prosecutions through the judicial processes without, in fact, killing the person in the process. What kind of justice system do we have? We have a justice system in which generation after generation is left to fight civil cases in courts. As the law minister, I accept full responsibility for not having been able to do enough to curtail delays, and no law minister can be blamed for it because everyone has tried and everyone has failed. But that is not to say that this is not a continuing challenge for our judicial system. It is. Take, for instance, the assault on the liberal order, the assault on the liberal traditions of India, the liberal legacy of this country. And I'm not saying so for the sake of any political rhetoric. I'm saying so as a citizen. All of us are feeling somewhat insecure, somewhat disquieted, somewhat discomforted by what is happening around us. It is not a question of one party fighting its political battle with the other. It's a question of the people increasingly being driven in one particular direction, whether you call it populist demagoguery or you may call it populism at its height where reason ceases to prevail. The fact is that we are seeing ourselves herded into one direction, contrary to deeply held convictions, which somehow, at certain points of time, is seen as crumbling under the weight of demagoguery. And someone will have to stand up. And who but you, who represent the finer traditions of India's democracy, who have aspirations for converting your democracy into a qualitatively better democracy, will have to ask yourself how you can move ahead on a course correction. And that is why I have chosen this university to come and speak to such bright minds as yourselves. Take, for instance, a complete lack of social sensitivity. I said in my press conference that I was appalled, in fact, broken within myself when I read in the newspapers of abject penury and inhuman insensitivity to the plight of the poor, which were brought to our notice thanks to media. You must have read in newspapers at least about 3 instances which I want to share with you. An instance in which 3 daughters of a dead mother who was so poor that they could not afford the wood for the funeral rites of the mother had to break open their only roof on their head to use the wood of their roof for carrying out the last rites of their mother. And no one, neither the administration nor the people, came up to offer succor. This cannot be the land of the Mahatma. This cannot be the land of the Buddha. This cannot be the land of the Ashoka. So somewhere, something terribly wrong is happening. There's another instance of a man having to carry the body of his dead wife on his shoulders for 10 kilometers in Orissa because he had no means of transportation. I know of a case which came to me, and the doctor wanted me to defend her, and I said, over my dead body, I will never take this case. And the case was that a man carried his 14 or 15-year-old young boy who was an asthmatic patient for an emergency treatment to a doctor in the hospital. And the doctor said, please take this boy to another ward because I don't have the oxygen at this point of time. When the father said, how do I carry my young son who's quite heavy to another ward which was quite a way off, she said, that's your problem. I don't even have a stretcher to put your young son on the stretcher. The result was that by the time the hapless father could take his young son to the next ward, the son died. And I was asked to take up this cause. Now, I want to ask myself this question. What is the point of this economic growth? which continues to enlarge the hiatus and the divide between the rich and the poor? What is the point of endless social programs where millions and millions of rupees, and I can say so with some degree of pride, that governments have given a lot of money for these kind of situations, but who has been held accountable in the 3 cases that I have cited before you? None. Take the case of the dignity of the aged and the dignity of the older people, the dignity of the marginalized. When I filed a public interest petition in my own right before the Supreme Court of India, and its 3rd hearing came up yesterday, in the first hearing I informed the court that I am before you because I failed as a minister, I failed as a parliamentarian, but I don't want to fail as a citizen to espouse the cause of the dignity under Article 21 of the older people. Today, we have 684 districts in our country. We don't even have one old people's home in all the districts. There are in all only 296 old people's home, whereas the minimum old people's home, as per official records, which are required to be set up, are at least 3,000. Even if one old people's home were to house 150 old people, although the WHO statistics tell us that in each district there are at least 500 people minimum who require shelter beyond their homes, we would need several thousand old people's homes. The total GDP of India for 2015 and 16 was 13 lakh crores or $2.3 trillion. And the total spend on the older people was 14,000 crores only in a country of 120 crore people. What kind of justice is this? What kind of governance is this? What kind of accountability is this? And what kind of democracy is this? These are questions that go beyond your regular LLB courses. These are questions which are not only of theoretical importance. These are ground realities of your country. And this is a country in which we justly take pride. And I am very proud of my country. But I'm very hurt at what we were able to do and we are able to do and we are not being able to do. Take, for instance, the number of issues that arise and that mock our democracy. And I have, in my book, raised 8 or 9 such questions. And I would like, with your permission, to read a few lines where these 9 questions have been summarized. I have asked myself, in relation to the assault on the liberal order, do we need to barter our freedom to qualify as patriots? You see around yourself a tendency that if you say something in exercise of your right of free speech, sometimes your nationalism itself is called into question so as to suppress your voice. So I ask myself, do we need to barter our freedom to qualify as patriots? Are freedom and nationalism mutually exclusive? Can we concede to another the right to certify our nationalism, negating the very basis of our social contract, namely the equality principle? Do we have to pronounce the demise of reason to appease radical populist demagogues? Is it fair to invoke moral relativism to eliminate the testing measure of power? Must we deny that the legitimacy of democratic formation rests on generally accepted notions of fair governance in accord with the values of human dignity? Is it necessary to suffer indignities on the road to power? And this question, ladies and gentlemen, is very close to my heart. Is it necessary to suffer indignities on the road to power? Our politics is no longer anchored in the dignity of its people. Our politics is no longer anchored in values that defined our national ethos. Our politics is anchored only and exclusively in the pursuit of power in the raw. And is it therefore a justified pursuit? And I've always believed that the only justification of pursuit of power is in terms of the ends to which it is applied. Are we applying the power that the people have invested in us as their trustees and legatees in the causes that are dear to the people themselves? These are the questions that you will need to ask yourself in order to lend moral legitimacy to politics as a vocation. And some of you would want to take to politics, and I urge you to take to politics. But ask yourself these questions. Unless you are charged with a spirit which reflects the generosity of heart and the largeness of your mind, you will not be able to contribute in the development of your nation. I have then gone on very clearly to say what I think leadership is all about. Leadership is not in occupying positions of authority. Leadership is to provide moral leadership to the country. Leadership is unremitting toil. Leadership is countless personal sacrifices. And leadership is about the many lows and a few highs in your life. Leadership is about the courage of conviction. Leadership is about the ethical dimension of the use of power. Leadership is about, as I said, generosity of heart and largeness of spirit. And nobody has best described leadership and the definition of leadership that appeals to me, at least, than the great Allama Iqbal, who in his inimitable verse had reminded us, Yaqeen muhkam amal peham, Yaqeen muhkam amal peham. And these are words which I will explain to you, that in man's crusade for life, the weapons has he. Yaqeen muhkam amal peham, muhabbat fatah-e alam, love wins all. Muhabbat fatah-e alam, jahad-e zindagi mein hai ye mardon ki shamsheerein. In the crusade of life, these alone are your weapons. Namely, in man's crusade for life, these weapons has he: conviction that his cause is just, resolution to strive till eternity, what I described as unremitting toil, compassion that embraces all humanity. And the same poet went on to describe individual qualities of leadership to say, Nigahe buland, this is my favorite verse which I recite very often, Nigahe buland sukhan, dil nawaz, jaan pursoz, yahi hai rakt safar, meere karwan ke liye. It means a soaring vision, Nigahe buland, sukhan, sweet nature and gracious speech. Nigahe buland sukhan, dil nawaz, ability to win the hearts of people. Jaan pursoz, dynamism. Yahi hai rakt safar, meere karwan ke liye. These alone are the qualities that the leader of the nation, leader of the Karwan must have. So if you measure today your leaders on these touchstones, I think you will be very disappointed. And I say so this cutting across party lines. Today the challenge is to give to India the leadership that it deserves, to give to our country a truly dignitarian democracy. And when I talk of dignitarian democracy, I want to make a slight distinction between libertarian democracy and a dignitarian democracy. Take, for instance, freedom of speech is the critical pivot of our libertarian democracy. But can you use freedom of speech to destroy reputations and dignity of individuals? That's the challenge of dignitarian democracy. And both the right to reputation, the right to dignity, in the pinnacle, in the hierarchy of freedom, fundamental rights, these stand at the pinnacle of that hierarchy, the dignity of the individual. If democracy does not subserve the dignity of the individual, if our libertarian democracy is abused to erode the constitutional order from within, we have a real challenge. And this is the challenge that the political leadership of this country must wake up to, must accept, recognize, and address. India is far too important a country not to deserve the leadership that it must have. It has a role not only in securing the future of 125 crore of its own people, but to secure the future of peace and prosperity of all the people in the world. In summation, I would only like to add that governments dissolve and nations crumble when centers cease to hold. The challenge before our country is to make sure that we move towards moderation and shun extremes, just as life shuns extremes and moves towards moderation. Our politics must move towards moderation. We must reclaim the moral center of this country. We must reclaim the moral fiber of our nation, without which we are lost both as a country and as a democracy. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Professor Rajkumar, for giving me this opportunity.
Introduction to the book. Shiva suggested I go first. So, looking at let me just start with the structure of the book itself, because I see that you have decided to, in many ways, create those 5 sections of, at times, seemingly disparate themes, but are weaving through a narrative of Indian democracy through aspects of nationhood to constitution to diplomacy and then to economy, and then of course reminiscence of your own contributions. My question is that whenever one writes a book like that, one runs into a big challenge of how a theme of this magnitude can be reflected in such disparate themes. And reading your book, it seems that it's one of those rare exceptions that this disparate thematic treatment actually comes up with a very compelling narrative of Indian democracy. So I would like you to begin with reflecting the challenges that you faced even putting together such a book.
Thank you, Raj, for putting a very important question. You are absolutely right. When I thought about writing this book, I wanted to discover in my own mind what was the purpose of the book. And I said, this book, if it has to serve any meaning, must be a window on the. And when I began to select my own writings and my own speeches in Rajya Sabha, of which this book is a compilation of sorts, I tried to focus on issues that were relevant throughout the 14-year period of my term as a member of the Rajya Sabha, and which continue to have resonance with the country, and which will continue to have resonance in the country for several years to come. And obviously, the constitutional chapter was necessary. The introduction of this book, the introduction chapter of this book is extremely important in my view, because that is a summary of the state of nation as I see it. And then, of course, since I had the opportunity to dabble in transformative changes on India's engagement with the foreign countries, particularly the Indo-US civil nuclear deal, our relationship with Japan, I thought it was necessary to have that chapter, because the international aspirations of a country are really an extension of our domestic imperatives. And therefore, and of course, as the planning minister, as someone who, and as industry minister who had a role to play on the economic side. For example, I have great satisfaction in telling you that the poverty line was devised at my instance by the Prime Minister. The Rangarajan Committee was set up by the Prime Minister at my instance, when I told him that I cannot face Parliament, I cannot go and tell Parliament that the Tendulkar line settled in the 70s was the right poverty line. And despite opposition, and I can say that my good friend and boss at that time, one day, was dead set against a revision of the poverty line. And so were many of my ministerial colleagues. But the Prime Minister agreed with me and said, no, I think Ashwani is right, and we need to revise that. So the economic chapter is a record of my work both as industry minister and key decisions which we took in the planning. The reason why all of this has been put together, to answer your question, is that these were transformative developments and continue to provide the bedrock for our future initiatives. So in fact, if you see the present government's initiatives, they are all a continuation of the initiatives that we took in the Planning Commission. All our schemes, social and economic empowerment schemes, have been continued. And I give full credit to the new government that they have thought it wise to continue with the schemes that we have.
Thank you very much. The second thing I want to just raise it immediately as a starter to this whole discussion is that the book, of course, has a very sort of compelling narrative of the big challenges of Indian democracy, beginning with the state of the nation, but also you talk about the limits of law and constitution. For many of us who read the book, do you feel, so since the title of the book is Hope in a Challenged Democracy, what part of the book you feel, or at least your argument, provides that hope when there is so much despair in relation to all forms of exercise of power and functioning of institutions?
It's about where I describe what leadership is all about. And I've said not long ago, we had examples which demonstrate that even while pursuing a political life, people have been able to advance humanly. And our founding fathers are the classic example. Till the 70s, we had leadership which was so committed to the well-being of this country that smaller discordant noises were not even heard. But today we see just disgust and discord. The hope is that we still have outstanding people, and I give an example of someone like Dr. Manmohan Singh having been able to rise to the office of the Prime Minister. Is a sign that all is not lost in this country. What we need to do, and that's the reason I've said in my introduction, that some may find this book as overtly critical. It is critical because I wanted to critique what has gone wrong with us. Only in order to say that hope is not lost, all is not lost. In fact, we have full confidence that the generations that are now going to come at the helm of affairs in the country will be able to steer the path.
It was also very refreshing to see parts of the book when you were rather candid about the functioning of your own party and indeed the government. So let me just ask that when you were writing those parts of the book, did you find it slightly awkward, or what kind of, how do you approach those parts of the book, particularly when you are in many ways significantly part of certain aspects of decision-making process and being part of the party and the government?
It's only when you are part of the process that you know the exact reality, and it is only if you are a part of the process that you can comment on what was wrong and what needs to be addressed. For example, I've said in terms of party politics, I've said that there's little scope for multiple loyalties in politics. And that's a statement I make consciously and I make tentatively. As I said, the reciprocal loyalties, as Thucydides would have us believe, is a function of the equation of power. You can only expect reciprocal loyalties when the equation of power is equal. For the rest, the leader can demand loyalty, and the worker and the follower will have to give that loyalty without any expectation of reciprocity. And this is something that I learned in the context of politics, in the study of politics, in the witnessing of politics, not only in my own party, but across the political spectrum. So the issue of power really is a moral issue, but nobody recognizes that such. In the course of my life, you will be surprised or disappointed to know that I have been asked by my well-meaning colleagues, Ashwani, you are too idealistic to be in politics. Come on, be a realist. What is this? You are not being realistic. This is real politics, man. You have to survive in politics. What is this idealism all about? And I've always questioned myself, why are these people in politics? Politics cannot be a business. It cannot be an end in itself. It has to serve a larger purpose, and that is what I write in my book. And the writing in the book is what gives me hope. And the writing is that anchor our politics in the dignity and esteem of our people, which you cannot do until you can sustain, restore, and nurture your own dignity and esteem.
All right, in this round is my last question to you. Rhetorically speaking, in some ways, we know that the founding fathers of our constitution, but also the republic, had huge emphasis on what you talked about, the ethical dimensions of politics. But we also know that the last 70 years of Indian democracy has been significant deterioration in the qualities and the moral fabric of our public officials, politicians, I dare say judges, and pretty much people in all walks of life. So what in many ways you think we ought to be doing to be able to take us back to the stage where we can redeem those values which have simply been lost in the last several decades?
The regeneration of the value system of this country will have to begin in the homes. Right from the time when the child is born and is able to understand. It must come from the parents, it must come from the teachers, it must come from what they read and what they understand. In an atmosphere where the only objectively definable criteria of success is wealth and authority, you will not see the resurgence of values. It is a painful reality that in a village, when an old teacher who has taught generations of school-going children travels on his old bicycle, and when his student comes in a Mercedes car, the village flocks towards the Mercedes car and lets the teacher go by on his cycle alone. This is a symbol of declining values. This is a symbol of perversion in our traditional value system. It has changed. And I have no magic wand. I cannot pretend that I have an answer. I can tell you it will begin with education. Beginning from home, all the way to the school, all the way into the colleges. Of course, we have to give enough sustenance, economic sustenance to people who take to noble professions like education so that they don't have to suffer terribly. And all of that should be the function of the economic growth in our country. The economic growth and the gains of economic growth should be so channelized that none of us should have to suffer a feeling of indignity in ourselves because of our.
Thank you so much. Now I invite Professor Vishwanathan.
Actually, I was almost getting converted to good behavior. In fact, I was so surprised that Raj used the word distinguished so many times that I'm going to challenge it. First question I'm going to ask is, this is a multiple narrative. It's a study in law, it's a study in democracy, it's a study in politics, it's a personal act of storytelling. And when I read all these as separate vectors, I have two quarrels. One, will the real Ashwani Kumar please stand up? And I mean this seriously. Because in a deep and fundamental way, this book is restrained because it's an apathy to a memoir. So what you have here is a brilliant exercise in table manners, while the gossip is left for your autobiography. And I want to quarrel with this. Because in a deep and fundamental way, this division between the two books worries me. And now let me push this. This is a brilliant narrative which hides some very deep questions. Let me move Ashwani Ashwani Kumar backstage. Here is a Congress leader meditating both on the decline of the Congress and simultaneously trying to worry about the rise of the BJP. At the same time, he locates this not within a parochialism, but within the future of our society and nation state. Therefore, controversy becomes important here. Appealing to leadership alone won't do. And in this case, I want to quarrel not with the constitutional lawyer, but with the storyteller. Have you done linguistic analysis of any one of your chapters? Just when the essay gets gossipy, he shuts it off with a quotation. The amount of brilliant quotations in the book are stunning, but I have a quarrel. Each of those quotations is a story stopper. And my thing is, I wish you had completed any one of the stories. Let me give you an example. Narika, tantalizing. You mentioned that you had a debate with Aruna Roy. Because, no, we have committed two parts, both parts. And you drop a sentence, and it's tantalizingly incomplete. And that too, it's in the introduction to the actual story. See, I want to say that, look, here are 6 issues, and I want you to respond here at least concretely to one of them. I think the UK government did 2 great things which need to be followed up and debated. One is the introduction of the RTI and its current fate, especially with the Aadhaar bill. You put them in separate chapters. I wish you had put them together, because your idea of a dignitarian democracy is actually false or survives at that moment. And I think the idea of dignitarian democracy is one of your basic terms. Second, if you're going to talk about a future for India, you have to have an answer for China. Is the language of security enough for it? Or do we need a civilizational response to China? Again, I think the story is incomplete. And as a congressman, talking about nationalism, talking about the traditions of Nehru, the Nehruvian tradition stops somewhere in this book. Part of your work is an appeal to going back to these traditions. How will you confront China today? Is it only going to be a borderline bickering? Is it going to only be a question of strategy and security, or something deeper? So one, dignitarian democracy in its future, especially around RTI. Third, for a man who talks, there's a brilliant sense of morality in your work, but it stops somewhere, and that's in your theory of climate change. Climate change in India hasn't gone beyond nationalist requirements. We're still saying we'll pollute as long as the West pollutes. Is that all that Gandhian civilization can offer the world? And in that sense, I think even the Congress today, whether you take Jaran Ramesh or anyone else articulated on the question of climate change, there's a gross inadequacy. My quarrel with this book is it's strangely incomplete. I wish I had, two storytellers to sit with you and say, okay, Ashwani, the following sentences, the following stories are incomplete, very diplomatic of you, but as a modern science book, it's brilliant. As a social science book, it needs at least another 400 pages. Now, will you at least supply us 4 of the 400 pages? First one.
If I were to answer each option's questions, each answer would require a separate book, not 4 pages, but a separate book.
Okay, what book it is?
This book was not intended to be a political memoir. That is why it is tantalizingly short of certain details. I'm not ready for a political memoir yet, because most of the actors about whom I have to speak are alive, and there are inherent limitations in writing a political memoir if you are not to come out with the truth and all parts of the truth. This book was also not intended to be a thesis in sociology, and therefore it certainly is not an expansive exposition of many, many vital points that has raised. But I do want to state that the few introductory pages that I wrote for each piece or each chapter were intended to provide the context and the frame of reference why this got to be written. Coming specifically to RTI and Aadhaar. The Aadhaar issue, and I can share this with you, and I'll be happy to know what I have to say, first was brought to my attention when I was Minister of State for Planning. Repeated questions were being asked by your good friend Rama Joyce of the BJP in the Rajya Sabha, and a very distinguished jurist, questioning the statutory basis and the privacy issues linked to Aadhaar. And since it was my duty as the Minister of State for Planning to answer the questions on behalf of the Prime Minister, who is the Minister in charge of planning, I had serious difficulties, both as a lawyer and as a minister, to answer these questions, because I felt that the issues Rama Joyce had raised were valid, and time has proved that those issues were valid. I was confronted with an opinion of a law officer and then of a senior law officer to say, no, all of that was well. Since I was also a lawyer, I dared to disagree with that opinion, and I told the Prime Minister that we will need to have a statutory basis for Aadhaar, and we will need to address the privacy concerns. Privacy concerns arose not only in the context of Aadhaar, they were raised by me in the context of the DNA profiling bill as well, which was also brought to my attention as the Minister for Science and Technology. So I raised all those issues. Eventually, the Yashwant Sinha Committee, the Standing Committee of Parliament, of which Mr. Ashwani Sinha was chairman, decisively held that Aadhaar lacks a statutory basis, and the Prime Minister then agreed that we need to have a statutory basis. So my objection to Aadhaar was not intended to be linked to RTI, because I was agitated when the Attorney General of India deigned to tell the Supreme Court that privacy was not a fundamental right. That was the provocation for the piece that I wrote on privacy as part of the Constitution chapter. So the arrangement of the book follows the provocations, it follows the context, and it was so arranged. Since it was not part of a political memoir or a story of my politics, it only stated as much as was required to be stated for that piece to make sense and to provide the overarching context of the relevance of the piece. RTI. Aruna Roy definitely asked me in the intercession of a TV debate, why is it that you are defending the government line when the National Advisory Council under Sonia Gandhi is all supportive of RTI? And I told Aruna Roy, I said, Mrs. Gandhi has never told me that she has any serious objection to anybody raising an objection if there's a serious objection to be raised to any aspect of RTI. I still maintain, and I hold, that certain clauses in the RTI had the effect of derailing the entire administration of the time. I took up this matter in my conversations with the Prime Minister along with members of the Planning Commission, and I said, this was at a time when the UPA2 was being charged, and in my view, rightly so, for complete paralysis of governance. And one of the major reasons for the paralysis of governance was the fear of reckless RTI applications being made. And I'll give you an example. One of the applications that was made, I didn't see it myself, but one of my secretaries told me, and I've always lied to me, was an RTI application calling upon the Prime Minister's office to give details of the instruments of surgery that were used in the operation conducted on the Prime Minister, and whether those instruments were available in the country, and whether the Prime Minister was following his doctor's advice and eating and drinking as per the doctor's advice. But this could never have been the intention of the RTI. And I do believe that RTI is a great instrument of empowerment, and I support it wholeheartedly, but it is also an instrument which, like many other instruments, is being abused on a daily basis. for settling political scores, for any kind of things. Now, the question about dignitarian democracy, the moral appeal in politics that you ask, I stand by that. I believe that the way we conduct our politics is robbing each one of us. Allegation has taken the place of proof. The cardinal principle of presumption of innocence of individuals has been given a go by. It is being reversed. You throw a stone on a person, and you throw mud on him, and ask that person to bring the mud. Give the stone and mud off. Our judiciary, on this score, has not risen to our expectations. The fundamental role of judiciary is to protect the dignitarian anchor of the Constitution. And who will come ahead? I think the citizenry has to come ahead. It is not an appeal to leadership. While I do say that the country deserves the leader it deserves, the country gets the leadership that it deserves. If the people are indifferent to the kind of leaders they will have, you will continue to have the leaders which are not up to date, which will not deliver on the challenges that we face. So I think the real process of rejuvenation of India's democracy has to begin with the students, with the thinkers, with the citizens, with the ordinary people who actually are the backbone of India's democracy. The little man going with a little pencil on the election booth, as Churchill reminded us, who puts across and vindicates democracy. He has to be knowledgeable, he has to be conscious, he has to be assertive. And no leader can afford to ignore the collective conscience of the nation. But the leaders have failed to arouse the collective conscience of the people. So what happens? People will have to find new leaders. People will have to create leaders from within themselves, only by being activists in politics, not by being politicians.
You know, one of the most fascinatingly understated parts of the book is you say that the Modi regime was an imitation of UPA, but an ironic variant of it. So every major progressive legislation that it took, they wrecked in a very creative and interesting manner. I want to push it, because I think, and Bala was also a well-behaved book, but I want you to use your perspective on this to challenge the current regime. Not in terms of politics, but in terms of it, the way it constructs legislation, reform, and change. The current regime, in a critical sense, because I think critique is very important, especially within the acting. Now, given your perspective, normatively, politically, democratically, I think one has to look at the current regime in a more systematic way. And it cannot be done purely at the level of no's or yeses. It has to move to a certain level of the concrete. Can I push you into it?
I agree. Sure, I agree with you. And I think one of the reasons why I have not formulated the critique in the book in the manner you would expect me to or you want me to, and legitimately so, is owed to my own nature. As I said, I believe that our politics should shun extremes, and even in terms of political discourse, the rancor in the political discourse that is seen all around, as Obama said, a discourse coursed with rancor is something that doesn't appeal to me, and that is why I'm understated in my criticism, although I'm there. I'm understated in my criticism by choice.
If you're criticizing an Obama, I don't mind understatement. If you're criticizing a Trump, understatement becomes ironic. Can I push you into
Yes, you are right when you say that it is a crime to be silent when there's a duty to speak. And I have spoken, but I may not have spoken in a language that some others would prefer. And that failing, if it is a failing, is owed to my nature not to use very harsh words. I believe, and I must tell you once, when I was the spokesman of the Congress Party on a regular basis, I still do some talking for the party. Many people went, I'm given to understand, to Mrs. Gandhi and said, Ashwani is very good as a speaker, madam, but he's a little soft. So in one of my conversations with her, she said, Ashwani, do you think we should be more aggressive on TV? And I said laughingly to her, I said, madam, if you have a sound argument, you don't need a loud argument. And I believe, even in a book, if you have a sound case, you don't have to be very hard-hitting. People know, and just as you've discovered what I'm trying to say. Now, you said that while I have mentioned about the decline of the Congress party, I have criticized the rise of BJP. I have not criticized the rise of BJP. If the people of this country want BJP to rise, so be it. It is a part of democracy. What I have tried to question is the policies that have come to be associated with BJP, these subversions of the liberal conscience, the assault on the constitutional order, the ways of pushing through legislation against conventions of the Constitution are all subtle and not so subtle attacks on the constitutional order. And I've mentioned it. Perhaps when I write
one question. The word challenge democracy, what does it refer to?
challenge democracy refers to all the things that I
No,
mentioned.
then we're talking about a regime. We're talking about a certain kind of policy. And I think, Ashwani, I think it's important, even for well-behaved politicians, to sometimes use a language of a different kind. And I think there's something about your language that worries me. I'm taking you at your strengths.
Well, let me read the language. I think the language is absolutely, I have to read this because I think that's the complete answer to it.
No, but you know, that's the trouble with your quotable quotes. The quotable quote hides the true story.
Now, let me tell you now this. When I say, despite its proclaimed resilience, ours is a weakened democracy, denuded of its deliberative apparatus, devoid of its liberal conscience, and robbed of its moral appeal. When I say that this book is about contested ideas and competing equities, ideological preferences and proclaimed biases, the legacy of liberalism and impulses of parliamentary majorities, the suborning of principles to political expediency, and a gradual erosion of the constitutional order from within, I think I say it all.
No,
I don't think so.
you say it at a level of intention, which makes it sound so sublime that it doesn't touch the actual issues of politics.
Perhaps I will keep this advice in mind, and maybe when I write my political memoirs, maybe I'll be
Waiting with the next page.
I hope I will make it easy. So one of the big reasons, which is acknowledged by pretty much most political commentators, political parties, of UPA's demise, you can say, after 10 years of its governance, is the significant undermining of the citizens' trust through systemic forms of corruption that was deeply embedded in many aspects of its exercise of power. And you have talked about it in your book, both in the context of RTI to some extent, but also in the context of Lokpal. Now, can we say that at a political level, the saga of scams unraveling through that process was also an example of the challenged democracy that you talked about? And despite having so many, let's say, enlightened and accomplished individuals as a part of the government during the time, there was the high level of cluelessness and complete lack of understanding of that need to maintain that basic degree of citizens' trust that undermined the ability of UPA to recover despite all the other accomplishments it had. And so my question really, which draws out of that, is how do you create an hopeful environment in which so much opportunity was lost during those years, and how do you resurrect the trust that was given and indeed was lost?
That we were remiss is plainly clear. We just had lost the connect with the ground realities, and when we realized that we had lost the connect, perhaps it was too late. Now, for example, when I talk of challenge democracy, The instance of 4 senior ministers went to the airport to receive Ramji, who had all but orchestrated an anarchist kind of an agitation, not permissible within the constitutional order, was itself an aberration of democracy. When we co-opted non-parliamentarians and legislatures in the drafting of the law parliament, it was outside the constitutional order. It was clearly an exercise in desperation. Corruption, scams certainly hit the UPA 1 and UPA 2, more particularly UPA 2, as nothing else admitted. But the point was that we were unable to deal with the recklessness of the allegations. We treated, in our conduct, allegation as evidence of proof, completely contrary to every known principle of fairness and justice. Now, governments and the state is meant to preserve the Constitution, and not to succumb in the face of reckless assaults on the Constitution. We clearly missed the boat. We clearly went wrong, and that's why we paid the price. Now, your question is, how do we resurrect people's hope in our democracy? And as I said, stand firm by a principle. And I've stated in my book, when you begin compromising with the principle, the aberrations have a way of perpetuating themselves. You don't compromise once, you keep then compromising it, because that initial compromise becomes a precedent. Now, take for example, when ministers were asked to resign in UPA 2, similar demands were started to be made against the chief ministers of Himachal, chief ministers of Uttarakhand, chief ministers of Kerala, chief ministers of Karnataka. Thankfully, they were not asked to go mainly on the basis of an FIR, because they must never be. What would have happened to the leadership of the Congress party, who is a self-facing trial? Accusation cannot take the place of proof. That's the fundamental principle of the constitutional law of this country. And those who are supposed to sustain and protect the Constitution becomes parties to the aberration of the Constitution is something that
Thank you very much for that. I would like to invite some students and faculty to raise some questions, but I'll just raise one aspect of it. I want to shift gears. The book is also very rich in looking at the world. You have devoted a part of it on Japan and China, and also looking at the Indian multilateral engagement. I want to raise a question on China. And so, much of the book is about the state of the nation and the future of democracy. And we all know that we have seen the extraordinary growth and evolution of China as a country. And we are, while we are steadfastly adhering to the democratic values that we espouse, one of the big questions that, and when you talk about China, we know it's not only not democracy, but it has a form of authoritarian form of government where decision making is entirely based upon different grounds. The question that many of us have always asked in relation to India and China is the fact that why everybody can say whatever they want in India, talking about your own critique of the freedom of speech, and people can't say many things in China. The question that we really need to ask in India is, are we being heard? And the question in the context of China is that even if people can't say a lot, the party, the Communist Party, and also the officials who are running the country, are they hearing the people's voices, even if not much is being said? So in a way, I would like you to briefly articulate as to the dichotomies between democracies and authoritarian forms of government and how it gets reflected in the context of India and China.
I don't think I have a difficulty at all in making the choice. The choice is obvious. I would prefer democracy with all its faults. And China, with all its power and growth and lack of democracy, is not a country that appeals to me. Whether authoritarianism is a strength of China or not, I'm doubtful, because we have two Chinas, one which you see in Beijing and Shanghai, and in other places like Shenzhen and Hong Kong is one China. But what is the real China is that China still lives in abject penury. barely subsistence levels in the villages of China. And there's a huge volcano waiting in China to blow up. So I have absolutely no difficulty in making moral choices between democracy in India and authoritarianism in China, and I lean in favor of democracy with all its faults. I would also like to answer yours and Shiv's question with reference to China, whether our engagement with China should be only from the prism of strategic and security considerations, or whether there should be a civilizational response. The civilizational response is clear. We are a democracy believing in dignity and liberty of the people, whereas China is not. That choices are made. However, I have absolutely no doubt, from whatever little readings I've had, that India has to fear China, never Pakistan. Pakistan cannot detain us much longer. We can meet Pakistan on its terms whenever, wherever. But China is a country India has to be wary about. China is our biggest trading partner. We have a huge trade deficit against India in our trade with China. We have a huge border with China. China's capability vis-a-vis India in all traditional strategic warfare parameters is 1:6. They are ahead of us by a factor of 1:6. Despite the fact that India is now maybe the 4th or 5th largest spender on military, China is way ahead of us in strategic power, where it is the only area where we were superior to China till a few years ago was in supercomputing. They had even overtaken us in supercomputing. And I had got Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to grant 6,000 crores of rupees for developing a supercomputing precisely for this reason, which work is underway. But as I said in my opening notes on China and the foreign policy subject, on external affairs subject, that peace is the dividend of power. If we need to live in peace with China, China must be fearful of our capabilities. Now, the traditional argument given in the defense ministry establishment is that there is no way we can graduate to the level of China's military spending, because that is spending far beyond us in the last several years. But because we are both nuclear powers, we have a nuclear deterrent, so we can't starve our people of the development fund. So there's value in this, that at the end of the day, two nuclear powers can't go to war. But we also know that if nuclear powers can't go to full-scale war, you can still prevent skirmishes on the borders. And that capability needs to be strengthened. India must always be fearful of China, apprehensive about China, because as we are told, it is inherent in the anatomy of power that it grows with every exercise thereof. I had a meeting way back in 2004 or 5 it was, in China, with 3 of their top leaders there, Zhang Zemin, Li Peng, and Zhu Rongji. 3 different meetings, 1 hour each. Each one of them told us that for 20 years, and this was 2005, 20 years, Mr. Kumar, we want to live in peace with everyone. We don't want to rake up any border dispute with India, any dispute with China, with Korea. For 20 years, they kept repeating 20 years. We are approaching to 2025. It's only 8 years ahead. And you are seeing what is happening in Senkaku, in Japan. You are seeing what is happening in Korea. You are seeing what is happening in Arunachal. You are seeing they are blocking us in NSG. You are seeing they are blocking us in UNSC. These are serious challenges for India. So if peace is the dividend of power, as Margaret Thatcher reminded us ever and ever again, India must speak from a language of power and from a position of power.
Thank you so much. I invite some comments and questions from students and faculty here. Feel free to raise your hand and ask your question.
The question is, there was a gloomy tone to your presentation. It was in the context of parties winning power, losing power, and the changing that comes with it. However, if you take the longer picture, I think there's a lot of hope. I mean, from a country that couldn't feed 400 million people, we are self-sufficient with 1.2 billion people. From literacy in single digits, we've reached something in the 80-odd %. life expectancy has gone from 30 to about 67. So when you look at the longer picture, we've done pretty well. I would say that the picture is one of hope, and that the short-run blemishes that go with parties, in looking at that, you're losing the overall optimistic picture.
That's why. But that can't stop me from raising the questions that stare me in my face. You can only have hope in a better future if you are conscious of the challenges that you need to address. In that context, in the scheme of the book, the inadequacies had to be projected. The achievements are well known. We are a $2.3 trillion economy, the fastest growing economy. The levels of poverty, level of number of people living below poverty line has been raised. This we have parroted for years and years ahead. What we need to parrot now, because we have gained on some fronts, doesn't mean that we condone the assault on liberal order. It doesn't mean that we condone the aberrations in the conflict between the libertarian and egalitarian democracy. That we forget about the increasing gap between the rich and the poor and the lack of social sensitivity. The more money India, the more economic growth we are having, the less social sensitivity we are having. So these are challenges. Something is wrong with the social system. You know why I created an old people's home in my constituency in Gurdaspur? I come from Punjab, and Punjab is a state known for maintaining very strong family bonds, where the elderly are respected and looked after. I was appalled to see old people being denied their humanity, denuded of their dignity by their own children in their homes. And I spent about 3 crore rupees setting up an old people's home which can house only 50 people. Am I not entitled to ask the question, why is it that a country that claims itself to be the rising economic power of the world can't take care of its 10.38 crore people today? And this population of 10.38 crore people, that is above 60%, is going, which is now 8 point some percent, is going to become 12% in 2026, where this number will go to 17 crore people. Out of which 17 crore people, I am told at least 40% of these 17 crore people, or 10.38 crore people, 40% of 10.38 crore people need some kind of shelter outside their homes. I'm entitled to ask myself, why should I proclaim the grandeur of the economic growth of my country if this country can't protect the human rights of 10.38 utterly vulnerable segments of our society? It's a legitimate question to ask. And the reason I ask this question is because I don't want to lose hope. I want to give hope to the people. You see, the only way democracies will survive and democratic leadership will have an appeal is if they can give hope to them, hope to those who are hopeless.
Motion, you had a question. Last chapter, you talk about a more personal, poignant, your own sensitivities of how the last part of your exit from the cabinet and the circumstances under which it happened left you with a sense of sadness and disappointment. Not only I would like you to articulate a little bit about it, but then that is not unique in the Indian context, right? I mean, this is just repeating itself in different forms and manifestations, and I would dare say even across political parties and dispensations. So then the question is, to what extent is there a fundamental problem about the durability of our democratic institutions, that we run the risk of wild allegations constantly given against people who hold power, and the mob mentality of both, at times even lack of civic consciousness reflected in the people who hold power, end up undermining the basic norms of what you mentioned, decency and decorum, which gets translated into the political discourse. And a related aspect, as a lawyer, I've probably for the last 2 decades I've been deeply concerned about the 2 aspects of what criminalization of politics, which long ago the Bora Committee report talked about, and more recently, at least the last decade, of politicization of crime, where almost all aspects of crime is an opportunity for political parties and governments to respond to it when they come to power. So what ends up happening in the anti-corruption effort is whenever new governments come to power, series of cases get filed against the people who were holding power in the previous government, the institutions, be it the Central Bureau of Investigation, the Vigilance Commission, the Directorates of Vigilance and Anti-Corruption Departments, the Central Vigilance Commission, all these institutions are willy-nilly becoming party to this undermining of political neutrality of institutions. So is this also a part of our destabilizing environment?
Well, these are very germane and relevant questions. Let me first answer the second part of your question. The criminalization of politics and the politicization of the police are directly interlinked. When you politicize the police system and the constabulary of the state begins to wear the color of the ruling party on its sleeve, that is the point of time when people lose faith in the impartiality of the administration. And when people lose faith in impartiality of the administration and consequently of the justice system, at least at the lower levels, that's the end of the constitutional order. That's the end of good governance. And that's the beginning of the decline of democracy. And that's the beginning of the doubts that people begin to raise about democracy. And that's very dangerous. This has been happening for the last several years. That is why I say a democracy denuded of its deliberated apparatus and robbed of its morality. To answer the first question about my own exit from the cabinet, yes, it hurt me no end. It still hurts. And as Pedro said, quote, the quote which Shiv referred to, it's not easy in a short time to do away with great calumnies. And they continue to hurt. And the reason I mentioned that chapter was not to bring out my own sense of hurt. It was only to underscore a principle. I was responding to the charges that my good friend Mr. Arun Jaitley had to face in the Delhi Cricket Controversy, Cricket Association controversy. And I said to him in my farewell speech, do not do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you. And I said, I feel sorry for you because you are now seeking to reap what you sow. You thought not for a minute, you didn't blink for a minute when you went in for reckless allegations against others. It has come to haunt you. And the point I was making was a point of principle. And that is the point I say, let all political leaders at least come together to say that we will not unfairly continue to tarnish each other's image. Because if the political class is denuded of its credibility, that's the end of political democracy. That's the end of the institutions of political democracy. Parliament is made dysfunctional because you want to wreak personal vengeance against political opponents. And the highest form of India's democracy becomes dysfunctional and is robbed of its utility. Courts become co-governors of the nation, upsetting the constitutional values. Courts begin to intervene on the plea of legislative lassitude. And they said, since the legislature is not allowed to do its work, since the executive is indifferent to the people's plight, we must intervene to uphold the constitution. Of course, that is one way of looking at it, and maybe not entirely wrong. But the fact is that it has upset the constitutional balance. It has completely rewritten the constitution as far as the functionality of the three organs of the state is concerned.
Thank you very much for that. Is there any question from the audience here? Please, Ashwani.
One is in response to the answer that you gave right now, and the other is in relation to the title of the book. So I'll ask the second one first. In a stress for decency in electoral politics across the political spectrum, if you reify the unity of the political class, then I think it sort of stands in the way of radical social transformation. So one way of looking at hope in a challenged democracy is that when democracy reaches its pitfalls, in terms of this sort of mudslinging amongst political parties, that is where the hope is. That there is a possibility of this, this order breaking and perhaps in favor of a more just social order. Of course, that's not what you're seeing right now. You're seeing a turn towards right-wing bigotry. but it also opens up the possibility of fissure. It's on those fissures that you can have radical social transformation, without which the existing class order tends to perpetuate itself. That's one problem. And the other one, I guess, is on the notion of an Indian narrative of a challenged democracy, because I guess there are parts of India which challenge the notion of India being a democracy in any sense. If you look at the fringes of the Northeast or whatever our status in Kashmir is, the notion of this being a democracy is challenged. So, before looking at hope in a challenged democracy, can we even think of, this nation state as a form of a democratic, in some form of a liberal democratic existence? So there are two things.
Well, the fact that is indisputable, but that will not make India any the less a democratic nation. We are a liberal democracy. We are supposed to be a constitutional democracy. We are not only a populist democracy, but we are a constitutional democracy. Now, these instances that you gave clearly challenge the notion of democracy in those states, but that does not mean that we don't have democracy in the rest of the country. The answer is not in the process thereby to question the utility of democracy in the country as a whole, but to ensure that democracy does get extended and is translated into action where it is not working itself out today. Kashmir, of course, presents a challenge of its own kind. It's a unique situation. It was never as bad as it was today. There's no denying the fact that Kashmir is a challenge, but it is not only a domestic problem. It has, as you know, international and strategic ramifications. So there are no easy answers, and I will not pretend that I have any. As far as North is concerned, again, more or less similar. Northeast almost doesn't consider itself sometimes as even a part of India because it is so remote. But I can assure you, and I can say this by virtue of the fact that as the Minister of State for Planning, I was very, very carefully looking at Northeast, and the challenge of Northeast is not lost on any central government. It is close to China. There are already organizations that want to delink themselves from India. Those challenges are there, and therefore a lot is actually being done, but it doesn't get surfaced in the national media about ways and means to move Northeast closer into the national frame of reference. When you talk of radical transformation on the ruins of our democracy, I don't think I'm so pessimistic in this book. I'm trying to raise these issues in order to revive a vibrant democracy, a true democracy, in which democracy will have meaning for larger number of people in a very purposive manner, not only in the manner of saying that we are a democracy, but where a person can grow and nurture his own being in the glory of democracy, which must be its fruit to everyone. That's the hope. That's the hope, and that's also the challenge. The challenge and hope go together. And therefore, since I'm an optimist by nature, I made hope as the principal theme of the book. But I don't see any contradiction in mentioning the challenges alongside.
Great, please. We are moving into the stage.
Your presentation, and that hit me the most was those 3 specific incidents that you narrated. The question that comes to my mind here is that now that we've recognized that there's a problem with respect to social sensitization in our country, I would like to ask you that what, in your opinion, is the role of the state to uplift or make the situation better? This also brings me to my next question, when I'm curious to know that if India at all can be considered a welfare state in its truest sense, then when clearly we as a state are failing to fulfill our responsibility to protect the health and well-being of the people who are in need of social and financial needs, basically. Is our democracy then only feeding into the requirements of the privileged and the elite?
Thank you.
Is to say that these aberrations are putting a question mark, just as you have raised the question mark. You validate my point. how do we justify to ourselves that such gross and insufferable acts of insensitivity have gone unnoticed and perhaps even unaccounted for? When we talk about the duty of a welfare state, we must correlate it to Article 19, the fundamental right of citizens to right to life with dignity. And the Supreme Court has said that dignity is a notion that transcends life, and the dignity even to the dead has to be respected. Now, that is why I raise those questions. That even though we are a constitutionally ordained welfare state, even though we recognize the highest right, the right to dignity in Article 21, yet somewhere in the implementation of those rights, in the enforcement of those rights, state, which is supposed to enforce those rights of the individuals, is remiss in its duties. And that is why we need to answer these questions. But that doesn't cease to make us a welfare state. We are a welfare state by virtue of the directive principles of state policy. We are a welfare state by virtue of the fundamental rights provisions of the Constitution. We are a welfare state by virtue of the constitutional order that the people of India have given unto themselves. Therefore, to answer your question, we need to set right the aberrations, to correct our faults, and to adopt a course correction as soon as we can.
Yes, Shiv, one last short question and then we'll wind up.
I wanted it at the last note. Okay. If you had to change 4 directive principles of state policy, yeah, I mean, some of them are a bit antiquated, you know it. Which would they be? What would you add? 4 new directive principles to take care of the current time. Because in a way it reflects your idea of the future.
First of all, I would, although the Supreme Court has gone a long way in saying that they are fundamental to the governance of the country, I would, by a constitutional statement, make directive principles as enforceable as the fundamental rights. And if I need to restrict the range of the directive principles, I would do that. But whatever I want to put in the directive principles, rather than leave the Supreme Court to say that they are fundamental in the governance of the country and therefore they are correlatable to the fundamental rights, I would narrow them down and I would make them as enforceable, as strictly enforceable as fundamental.
All right, I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ashwani Kumar for taking this time to come and be with us. It was an extraordinarily inspiring conversation for me personally. I want to thank him for writing the book and also to appreciate his long and arduous journey in public life, his commitment and dedication to nation building, and his contribution to develop an important intellectual discourse on issues that are not only complex, but also to be able to articulate as candidly as he has, being part of a political party, having served in government with colleagues who he's interacting with even today, is an extraordinary accomplishment, reflects his own commitment to values and ethics in public life. His personal integrity and rectitude has always been unimpeachable, and today we are very delighted that he has chosen to come here. So a warm round of applause for his contribution.
One request, since I will not have the opportunity of a feedback, I'll be grateful, and since you are also tech savvy and I'm also tech savvy, whatever your carry away thoughts are from this conversation, please put them on our Twitter account and on our Facebook account. I'll be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Great, and we have a small token of appreciation. I want to also take this moment to thank Professor Shiv Vishwanathan for being part of this dialogue. She was pretty well behaved today. That's quite rare. I want to thank all the students for your valiant effort to stay just a few days before the examination. I'm sure some of the things that he raised, you could weave it into your administrative law, constitutional law, political science, and other exams.